Hello everyone, and welcome to this third part of our tutorial on making terrain from broken toys. Since the end of our last video, I've given our piece a pretty solid base coat of black spray paint. It's very important that when you do this, that you use a spray paint like this Rust-Oleum here, and you'll see that it'll say it also bonds to plastic. Vitally important that it bonds to plastic, because if you use a less expensive version of spray paint, it won't bond to the plastic, and then as you continue to move your model around and play your games, it'll flake off, and then your model will be back to the original 9 or 10 colors that it started as. So this is painted up with the appropriate paint, and you can see that a black base coat gets into pretty much everywhere, which is useful because as we paint, we can just choose to leave some areas in shadow, and in some areas of this model, that's actually all the paint that it's going to get. Now, the next step is to give some color to the Jeep itself, and for me, I've arbitrarily decided that I'm going to make this a olive drab Jeep, in part because I game in 54mm scale with plastic army men, and it's greens against the tans. I mean, there are people who will use pigments and other shades of paint, and they'll also use various camouflage schemes for historical accuracy. This is just going to be a plain old green Jeep. The quickest way for me to do this will be to just apply olive drab paint over most of the model. I mean, I can always go back in and paint it with something else. But before I do that, I'm going to go into these small wheel well areas just with some masking tape. So I kind of like the idea of those areas remaining black and in shadow. So I'm just going to go and tape those areas up, and then I'm going to give this a coat of green, and we'll see what it looks like. Thanks so much. All right, so now I've taken a little bit of masking tape, and I've twisted it up and placed it here into the wheel wells. This should allow me to keep the wheel wells in the shadow that I want, and we're still going to get green on all the areas of the Jeep that we're going to work on. So I'm just going to go give this a quick coat of green, and then we'll move forward from there. We'll see you guys in just a minute. And moving right along, we have a coat of camouflage olive drab here. I like the looks of this very much. We're just going to take a couple of minutes, and we're going to remove this tape from here. So we're going to start just by kind of persuading it to come out gently. Come on now. There's one. We'll turn this around so you guys can kind of see the other side. Just going to pull that out. And lastly, we're going to get rid of this guy right here. Come on now. All right, so you can see that we didn't get a lot of olive drab inside. Our wheel wells are still that real nice black color that we were looking for. We got to maintain our shadow. So now our next step is actually texturing the ground. I found that whenever you're painting something in miniature, it's always best to start from the lowest layers of things and work outward from it, so you're painting on things that are successively higher. The lowest level that we're going to be dealing with just about all of this stuff is going to be the ground. So we're going to start just by doing some ground tones on this base. So I'm going to go get the paint ready, and then we'll begin. Now that the tape has been removed, I'm just going to use a plain sand-colored house paint, and I'm just going to paint in these areas, and I'll speed up the film so that you guys won't have to watch every brush stroke that I do. So now we've gone and painted a base shade for our ground. We're going to go ahead and shade it first, but we're going to give this stuff a chance to dry. So our ground tones are now completely dry, and the next thing we're going to do is shade them. One of the things that most modelers will do in order to make the details of their models pop out is to artificially create lowlights and highlights. So what we're going to do to help bring out the texture of this sand and gravel that we've glued in place is to thin out some dark brown acrylic paint with some water, and we're just going to paint it lightly over these areas that we've already painted with the earth tones. The thinned paint will sink down into the recesses. The base color will still be visible, but you'll see a very pronounced shadow effect. So we're going to take a palette. This is something you can buy at a craft store for about $1. And we're going to put a little bit of this brown paint in here. And I have this small water bottle here, which we're going to use. We're just going to almost fill the rest of this up with water. And then we slowly begin stirring to mix the paint. It's important to be patient during this step and to continue to work until the paint's completely mixed, because what you don't want are glops of dark brown everywhere. It also helps to have a towel or a piece of scrap cloth that you can use just to wipe off any excess. All right. So we're going to begin working. I'm just going to move this back here, and we'll put our work up here. And we're just going to start dabbing this dark color into these recesses. And you know, I think we might need a little bit more paint. So I'm not seeing as much color there as I would like. So just add a little more. And we'll mix again. Let's try this again. Oh, much better. Okay, good. All right, we've successfully used our shading color to get down into the recesses of our piece. Now it's time for us to accentuate the highlights. In order for us to do that, we're going to use a lighter shade than our base color. So we're going to look at, you can kind of see this nice light tan color. And we're going to paint that across the top. Now the way this is done is a technique called dry brushing. If you've never seen it, it's pretty simple. All you need is a really old brush and, you know, a scrap piece of cloth, and you dip your brush into the paint and you put it on pretty heavy, kind of like that. And then you will use the cloth to sort of sponge off all the extra so that there's not a lot of paint left on the brush. It's almost a dry brush, which is why they call it that. Then you take the brush and just drag it lightly across the areas that you want to highlight. And that brings out more of the details. And you'll find that one brush load of paint goes a really long way toward bringing out a lot of detail. So once you get your dry brush color squared away, you'll there. And so you can probably see kind of a pronounced difference between the way the rocks and high points kind of stand out on this side as opposed to how they look here. So I'm just going to speed the film up a little bit while I go through it. I'm going to dry brush the rest of this ground. Very simple step, as you can see. And now we're going to get to work on shading the next largest area of our project, which is the green body of the Jeep. Outstanding. Now that the dry brushing is all dried up, we're going to shade the chassis of our Jeep. Instead of using a darker color of green, which would suffice, I'm going to use a commercially available wash. This is an old one from Citadel. It's basically more like an ink. It's a very fluid medium. I just wanted to use it up because it's been sitting on the shelf for a while. There's no particular reason why I'm doing this over paint. But I'm going to paint this over this entire chassis, and I'll speed the film up so that you guys aren't stuck watching every brush stroke. And yeah, we'll be right back as soon as we slow things back down. All right, we're going to let this dry. We're going to give it a quick highlight, and that'll probably conclude this part of our tutorial. Our green wash is finally dried, so the time has come for us to highlight our Jeep chassis. We're going to do that with the same dry brushing technique that we used on the ground, so we just need a lighter shade of olive drab, which I was able to find here in this inexpensive military acrylic paint set that I bought at a department store. It'll be the same. We're going to wipe off the excess and then just drag the nearly dry brush just across the high areas of our chassis. That's going to bring out the
highlights, and it's going to emphasize the shadows that we just put in with our wash. I'll speed the film up here also so that you guys won't have to watch the whole time-consuming process.
take care of the dry brushing for the olive drab. But I think we're also going to do just a little bit of picking out some highlights with a real light cream color. So we're just going to use, this is just a pretty simple tube of acrylic paint. We're just going to use a little dab of that. And we're just going to use it to pick out the very, very highest points on our Jeep. So, you know, something like just across the top of the hood here, along the top of the windshield in a couple of places would probably be good. A little tiny bit right up here.
And we're just going to kind of bring out. If you use white for this, it's kind of a glaring difference. But if you just use a little tiny bit of cream, that tends to make the details pop out without it spiking off on the other colors. So we're just going to kind of. It's also very helpful just for sort of picking out the ridges and tops of things, you know. And we are going to be adding rust and similar effects to this thing, but this will be a nice way to kind of set off the highest points. And you'll see that I only dipped my brush once for this entire go-around on the Jeep, so it's clearly not a... just going to pick up those nuts a little bit. I mean, it's enough to kind of offset, but it does really bring the detail out. I think this area right here is a little weak, so we're going to lighten that up a bit too. It also helps to make it look a little bit dirty. But now that we have some of these highlights coming on, I think that's going to make that'll make our job easier in trying to make this look a little bit more convincing. All right, so that's going to end this portion of our tutorial. And when we come back, we're going to do some of the more detailed work. We're going to paint the engine, we're going to paint the gun, a couple of other things, and then we're going to shade and high brush those as well.